Boy, there's a sulfur smell coming through there.
There is.
Woo! All right.
But sometimes there's some really weird smells in here.
Oh, man. Well, between the chemical mixing next door.
Yeah.
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 All right.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Baritone Podcast. Today's episode features an interview Anthony did with Ben Seidel, aka Roemer. Roemer's new EP titled Straight Bars and Guns is out now on Old Bear Records, so make sure you go check it out, buy it, stream it, listen to it, and tell your friends about it. Ben is a great guy with a unique perspective. This EP is an inside look at Ben's personal wrestling with a bunch of different topics regarding social issues and the church. So here's today's episode with Ben Seidel of Roemer.
Lost a great prize of love. To keep your safeguards and fight for straight bars and guns. Oh love, oh my love, we fell asleep.
So, Ben, maybe just tell us a little bit about how you wound up in Berlin and
Right.
coming from St. Louis, growing up in the Midwest, I guess, right?
Well,
Is that considered Midwest?
I hope
think
so.
so.
I think I've been told I have a Midwestern accent. So, so I was born in St. Louis, Missouri, but my father's work moved the family around quite a bit. So I spent some time in St. Louis. We moved to Memphis, Tennessee for a while. And before I moved to Berlin in 2005, I was actually living in Northern Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C., because that's where my dad's work took us. I grew up in a Christian family. Going to church was important. It wasn't necessarily connected to a specific denomination or a certain stance on doctrine. It was more about where we were, where my folks felt like they could be plugged in, where we could know others and be known. But through that entire experience, being involved in ministry and in church life was something very important to my folks, whether that was hanging out in the nursery with kids or teaching a small group or a men's Bible study or doing Sunday school or working with the youth. Something else that was really intentional for my folks was supporting cross-cultural work. And going into ministry was always a valid career, at least from my folks' perspective, towards anything that I ever felt led to do. And I did. I really felt led to go into the ministry. But I had a cross-cultural experience when I was, 18, and I was in Austria, and I just fell in love with the German-speaking world. Historically, my family is German. My great-grandparents, kind of off the boat German folks, but no one in my family continued speaking German. So in high school, I decided to pick it back up and wound up going to a college that had a really strong German department and a really strong religious studies department. And through that experience, I was able to go study in Berlin at the Humboldt University in the theology department. And it was a life-changing experience. I met my wife, Yasmin, and she's a classy German lady. She's an artist. I met her in Berlin. So really, I got to Berlin because of school. Fell in love with the city. Fell in love with a really swell lady, and I was offered a job.
So that was like the trifecta.
It totally was. So it kind of, it all kind of came together. I was offered one of the best jobs in the world that does not pay. It's called church planter. And I was invited to be part of a German church plant team in the city. And the conversation went like this: Ben, we really would like you to be part of the team. We cannot pay you a dime. And I was like, all right. So
I accept.
it sounds good. So
Oh, that's
Yeah.
awesome. Well, I mean, but that's since developed a little bit. So
Sure.
you're not necessarily in one specific church anymore.
Yeah, that's correct. That is very correct.
How
yeah.
has that evolved
Right.
for you?
Well, I moved to Berlin in 2005, again, to be part of this church plant, essentially to help minister in this community and help with worship development and leadership and just, whatever needed to happen. It was a huge time of learning for me, making a ton of mistakes, learning from those mistakes. But what started to transition or kind of happen inside of us is my wife started a small business. Again, she's an artist, and so at the time she was working with vintage porcelain dishware and illustration and combining the two and refiring stuff in a kiln. Like, we have a kiln in my apartment. I told you she's a classy German gal. And so
There's got to be a code.
for the kiln,
There's no code violation there, or
no, we've invested. This is Germany, man. Like, we've investigated every. Of course, there's a code, but we're within code.
all right.
So
I like it.
yeah. So my wife's business started to grow. She was getting some really great press and magazines, and she was starting to go away on the weekends and during the week sometimes to these big design markets and trade shows, pitching her product and showing her off what she was making, and so other people could buy them, or boutiques throughout Germany and Austria and Switzerland could buy them. And I would come along every once in a while, and I just started meeting a lot of creative people and realizing I always knew I was married to a creative, married to an artist, but I really started realizing that that is something that deeply resonated inside of me. And I live in one of the most creative cities, definitely in Europe, probably if not the world. And I just didn't know artists, yet they all lived in my neighborhood. My church, however, wasn't in my neighborhood, which is not a problem. I just realized I just didn't know my neighbors.
Right.
After being there for close to 8 years at that point in time, I just felt like that needed to change. And it kind of felt like the Lord was introducing my wife and I to a new season of life, or season of ministry. And long story short, some stuff happened within the confines of our church, and it created a way for us to step out of leadership and just kind of pioneer what does it mean to be present in our neighborhood, to love artists, to love our neighbors well, to be a good neighbor. And we've been doing that for the last 5 years. So now I actually have a job in a music venue in my neighborhood. It's about a 7-minute walk from my flat. My wife has since got a new job. She actually works at an ice cream gelato store, another 7 minutes away from our flat. She has her art in her studio. She's making amazing, great stuff, working heavily in illustration. We have an indie folk band. That's what Roemer is.
So tell us a bit about Roemer, because Roemer is your middle name,
Right.
but you go by that music, like that's what your music is known under.
It's an artist name or a moniker. Roemer is a family name. I wasn't using it, and when it came to time to name this body of work that I was writing, it just seemed fitting to call it that.
Sing the blues, remember your hands. It's 10 and 2. Remember, oh yes sir, no sir, and no sudden moves, oh shots fired. Shots fired. Well, be safe, son, in all you do. And as you keep the peace like you.
There is a message to the music, which that's a no-brainer. I think a lot of Old Bear artists have. There's an obvious message. It's not just music for music. There's a message behind it.
Sure.
And I think on this particular project, there is a very strong message, even controversial, I would say, to what we have going on at least in America and probably the world, but
Sure.
in gun violence and guns. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
this particular set of songs it launches off from a perspective that you have on guns. And so maybe just share a little bit about your heart behind it, because if they just hear the music
Right.
and they don't know what's going on, they'll probably, clearly they'll pick that up through the spoken dialogue in the front end and the back end.
Right.
But maybe just a little bit more explanation to help
Sure.
cement your thoughts on that.
Sure. Well, I don't know if it's helpful. Look, I'm in my late 30s. I'm white, middle class, straight, cisgendered male. I grew up around guns, not like in a weird way, but I think maybe in a way that other folks like me maybe grew up, where there were guns in the house and there was ammo was never where the guns were. Everything was locked up and it was safe, and we were taught to respect firearms. They weren't in the house for defense. At least that was never said to me. It was more of an appreciation. It was more of family heirlooms. It was more of things that needed to be used for occupations that my dad had for a period of time. I was in the Boy Scouts. I have a shotgun shooting merit badge, and to be honest, when I was a teenager, I was really considering going into the military. Mm-hmm. Living outside of North America, being married to someone who's not an American citizen, and actually really being exposed to a form of Christianity that isn't white North American evangelicalism. Mm-hmm. It's just it's German. It's different, and then not just Germans. I live in a huge international city, and meeting Christians from all different parts of Africa and parts of Asia, followers of Jesus who just have completely different takes on gun ownership, on violence. Mm-hmm. Even people who've been horrible victims of violence in some cases. And I just started realizing that I'm uncomfortable with what seems to be like this rampant, unchecked use of firearms. I could be completely wrong. I'm 100% open to that. But folks are killing people in North America more with weapons, with guns, more so than they are, say, Germany. Obviously, the U.S. and Germany are radically different in size and population. I get all that. I don't know exactly what my point or my position is, other than these things upset me deeply. They mess with me. Something that really spurred on a lot of the writing for this project was watching the Facebook footage of the death of Philando Castile, who was pulled over and shot by a police officer. And his girlfriend Facebook lived it, and there was a young woman, her daughter in the car, and he was like, I look at that and think, sure, there's so much of this was so nuanced, and I get all that. Mm-hmm. And race plays in, like it's messy. It is messy, but that has to, at least for me, being 5,000 miles away, messes with me and upsets me because I have a cousin who's a cop, and I also have a cousin who's a black man, and they both live in the same state, and it just kind of hits me. Gosh, it's probably really hard and dangerous being both a cop and the other being a black man.
You're not a confrontational person.
No.
And this is uncomfortable for you because you recognize that it's going to bring a reaction.
For sure.
And that's, not scary, but it's uncomfortable because you're making other people feel uncomfortable.
Right.
And but I was going to suggest that it has, in my opinion, it's bigger than the guns.
I would agree.
Right?
100%.
And so it's bigger than just one situation, although that seems to be what's manifesting itself in pop culture, at least in North America right now,
Right.
is all around guns.
Right.
I would suggest that one of the things I took away from it wasn't even so much guns, it was just the way people treat one another.
Yeah. I think it's also important to say that this isn't just a reaction that's happening to current things, current shootings that we've seen or heard of. This has been in conversation and works for probably around 2 years. Chris and I started talking about this even before the election, the most recent presidential election in the U.S. You hit on something I think that for me is what I'm trying to, I guess, communicate in a way, is if we're going to say that we're followers of Jesus, the Prince of Peace, Jesus is not Mars, the god of war. Jesus is something altogether different. Following and worship Jesus is and declaring that Jesus is Lord is also saying that Caesar isn't, that the Roman Empire isn't in charge, that there's this marginalized first century Jewish peasant, homeless man, who has the daringness to call himself, a king, and start talking about the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, and his followers tend to buy into that. I understand. I mean, church history gets complicated. Humanity's complicated. We take guns away, people are going to kill people regardless. I get that. I totally get that. But this whole notion that longing for a day where we no longer learn war, and that comes straight out of Isaiah in the first 5 chapters of, Isaiah 2 in the first 5 or 6 verses. And Isaiah is painting this picture of saying, hey, let's go up to the mountain of the Lord, and he will teach us his ways. And people are going to start reshaping tools of war, tools of death, swords and spears, and turning them into tools of agriculture. In one way, you could say tools of life.
Sure.
And then there's this crazy line that says, the nations will no longer use the sword and rise up against each other, and nations will no longer train for war. Another translation would be, nations will no longer learn war. I feel like if we're followers of Jesus, followers of the way, followers of this Prince of Peace, that should be a longing. If I do have a position on guns, my position is this: I don't believe in the notion of redemptive violence.
Oh, my soul, the rent will fall behind. When your promised land, your best laid plans are hidden from our sight, you're still good news to those whose daily bread is dry.
I had a really good friend of mine shortly before coming into the studio. He's an older gentleman. We were talking about this, and he was trying to encourage me because again, I don't like conflict, and I just didn't want to upset a bunch of people. This is so much about this is me processing my thoughts and my opinions and my emotions, maybe even trying to arrive at an opinion. So I was talking to this gentleman in Colorado, and he just said something to me that I haven't been able to let go of. He goes, Ben, if what do you think North America could look like if the people coming to this new nation to practice their religion in their own freedom chose to interact with every person that they saw in this new land as image bearers of God, as seeing the spark of the divine that exists in First Nation Native American folk. Mm-hmm. That hasn't left me. When we talk about World War II, I live in Germany. We talk about World War II, we talk about Nazis. It's really easy to, justify the death of something that you kind of perceive to be ridiculously evil. I said something I think that we forget is in World War II, baptized believers on both sides killed each other. Mm-hmm. Like German Lutheran Christians who attend church were, behind the big Mausers, the big guns, shooting at the folks and storming the beach in Normandy. Mm-hmm. And the folks taking on that gunfire, many of them were also confirmed, probably even the Lutherans. These are followers of Jesus killing followers of Jesus. To stop this evil tyrant, I get that. It's all messy, again. But I think it's important to think that way. Yeah, we could say evil's evil. Yeah, but these are human beings created in the image of God. And if we follow the Prince of Peace, I think that needs to shape some of this conversation. So at the very least, I long for a day where I no longer learn war.
You're still good news to those whose daily bread is dry. You're the stony rose that waters our souls and wanders close in this desert life. You're the tide that binds our bread and wine, our 5 by 9 in this desert life.
I mean, you could change the whole story. You could be like, well, shoot, if Jesus had a gun, man, those Romans wouldn't have taken him down. Mm-hmm. And when Peter pulls out the sword, and chops off the ear of the guard, Jesus stops him, makes that statement: "Those who live by the sword die by the sword." He heals the guy, but Jesus goes into a death, a horrible death, but is resurrected. And that's the guy that we're following, who walks into a situation where there's complete injustice being done to him, false things being said about him, and chooses not to defend himself, not to strike out, even though he could, Lucifer, Satan, tells him right after his baptism, that he can command the angels to come down. Sure. He's taunted with that, when he's on the cross. He could have done that, but he didn't, and he rose again from death. Death is tricky. It's hard. It hurts. I get that. I don't want to die. If someone were to hurt my wife or threaten my wife or my family, to be honest, I don't even know what I would do, how I'd react. I don't like confrontation, but I don't want you beating up my wife.
Sure, right, of course.
And but see, that's where I am. I'm wrestling with this. This is something that I can't just passively stick in the back of my head and say, oh yeah, one day I long for no more war. This hits home and it keeps coming at us everywhere. It affects our daily lives in many ways. And to me, making this music is, I want you to be reminded and saying, no, you can't forget about this.
So are you comfortable with the idea that your message may drown out your talent?
When I think about songwriting for me, I don't know. I mean, I just don't really write for anybody. I write for me. Like, songwriting is how I process my thoughts and my feelings and emotions. Sure, I spent some money and got behind some microphones and invited other artists to be a part of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm making my processing of my thoughts and my emotions public. I get that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay with that. I'm not trying to convince anybody most certainly with my lyrics. To be honest, I'd be actually more interested in sitting down and having a bourbon and a chat, getting to know your story, and maybe you getting to know mine, and maybe us get to know each other. Not great, and I can't do that with everybody. I get that. Maybe the message is going to turn folks off. Okay. Yeah.
Well, I don't think that's a bad thing either. I think that too much art is too passive. Doesn't create a reaction beyond I like that or I don't like that.
Right.
So, if I'm scrolling through my Instagram feed and I follow, art galleries and stuff like that, because my wife's an artist too.
Right.
So much of how fast I scroll, I don't actually even, if I don't like it, I just don't like it. But I'm not confronted with any part of it I'm not confronted with the message behind it.
Right.
And so here's what I'm thinking about what you're offering is, while you may not agree with the message and you may not agree with, all the stand, whatever it is, the stand that you're taking, good, in my opinion, good art requires you to wrestle with more than just I like that or I don't like that.
Right.
It causes you to have a reaction deeper than what the eye or the ear tells you.
Sure.
It has to affect the heart. It has to affect the emotions in order to, I believe, really sink in.
Sure.
And so everybody gets one listen, and then they decide from there.
Right.
And so my thought behind when we were creating this, just in light of the idea that, like, I hope people give it a chance, and I believe that they will, because you are not the first and you won't be the last. I mean, Dylan, you look at Bob Dylan, and when he was writing stuff, caused people to have some real strong reactions either way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm not by any means the first, and I don't claim to be. There's lots of folks who've written in similar directions, and I actually probably even said more controversial things than I have said, and actually maybe even with actual positions.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
you're saying,
yeah.
I totally understand, because you're saying that this whole experiment this week is a window into your wrestling.
Yes.
And it doesn't mean that you have arrived at a specific thing, one way, that certain things you have along the way, and I think they're all very valid things. So,
sure.
I think you're gonna be just fine.
Yeah.
And you know that too.
Sure.
I mean, life, look at it. It's super interesting music, and I'm a fan, and that's not just because I, played one thing on it. But I do believe in the power of message and music together.
Yeah.
So a line that stuck out to me that I think is really cool,
Okay.
and you can just explain it. It's very self-explanatory, but
Okay.
I maybe just paint a picture for us, okay?
Sure.
When idols crumble, they don't go quietly.
Yeah.
So I love that line.
Yeah, me too.
And well, I hope so. But I mean, like I said, that's pretty self-explanatory. But explain maybe in that song,
Yeah.
context and stuff.
Okay, well, the song is called Russian Roulette. Kind of as a whole, the song is, in many ways, is using the game Russian roulette as a metaphor to talk about essentially the exclusivity of Christ. And it's wrestling with faith and doubt all at the same point in time. That was just the opening line. When idols crumble, they don't go quietly. I mean, that's been my experience.
I was thinking, here's the picture that I grabbed a hold of. When the news was playing the people pulling down the Saddam Hussein's
statues,
statue, right?
Yeah.
And when it hits the ground, it just goes everywhere.
Right.
And it was a loud scene. Not just the statue itself crashing, but people around it, people's reactions to it.
Right.
That I perceived as joy.
Sure. Sure. No, that's super interesting because that's not what's going on inside of me when I wrote. But I love it, and that's what's so great about art, man. Is I'm not communicating some sort of objective truth. Art is just always subjective. Like there's, I heard Gillian Welch once say, she stopped telling people what her songs are about.
Yeah.
So when someone would walk up to her and say, "Hey, is this song about?" and then she'd say, "Oh yeah," like she would just agree with the person.
Sure.
I like that. And to be honest, I'm really thankful that you shared it with me that way, because I look at it and be like, oh no, that's actually a really cool way to look at it. For me, it wasn't. It's more of a griefful. It's more sad. It's more a sense of grief when idols dissolve and crumble inside of our lives. Maybe more specifically in my life, it's been my experience that they don't go away quietly. There's still a longing inside of me to worship at their feet as opposed to Jesus. And for me, it's the line before it that sets it up. It says, "At your breakdown, drop your God, and breathe. When idols crumble, they don't go quietly." For me, I worship Jesus. I worship a ton of other stuff too, and sometimes those idols get knocked down and they just get destroyed. But man, that they're it's almost like any sense of any kind of addiction. It's, you can be in recovery, you can be sober, you can be clean, but there's still this echo, this thing.
Sure,
that's
man.
there. And
absolutely. And
so, for me, when I was writing that tune,
right,
that was what was inside of me. Yeah.
Hey, your breakdown, drop your God and breathe. When idols crumble, they don't go quietly. We got one shot in this Russian roulette pipe dream, and it's a flare on the horizon over empty seas.
You know, this project for me, again, studio-wise, just to kind of bring people into the experience of recording this project.
Right.
Outside of the message, I think it brought everybody that was recording over the week together.
I would agree.
In a different way.
For sure.
And multiple times throughout the recording process, we would stop and have an hour conversation. And maybe it wasn't even about the topic of what we were working on,
right,
but just more about encouraging one another
to
be better Christians.
Yeah.
And it inspired something within me that it kind of put something together. And this is how I feel like sometimes we learn things in our faith. Is a week before starting this project, I had a conversation with somebody while we were on the road with brothers, and this person said to me, and I don't know why they said this to me. I don't know why. I don't know what spawned the conversation to go this way.
Right.
But it was actually in a departure. It was like in a I'll see you later. I don't know why. But she says to me, I've never told I always tell my kids, don't tell other people you're Christians. And I don't remember why that came up, but it's going to sound bizarre.
Yeah.
There was a reason, but she
Sure.
said to me, I never tell my kids, I've always told my kids to not tell other people they're Christians. And that was like, well, it's like, whoa, well, why not, right? And she said, because someone once told me that people should be able to just know that or discover it. Mm. And if you claim yourself to be a Christian first, but then in turn don't live it, it's worse off that you called yourself a Christian than the other way around and saying, you know, that somebody goes, there's something just, you know, do you follow Jesus? You know, a lot of what you're doing lines up with, you know, and at that point, you know, so the letting other people identify within you that you're a Christian rather than identifying it yourself. I mean, whatever. I think when we were recording this project, I was realizing that everybody in the room was learning how to better live life where they don't have to call themselves Christians, but be encouraged to live like Christ, so that other people would see that in us, and that we would be able to then, our message would be more powerful, because we didn't come in with a certain set of religious techniques. We didn't even, you know, we don't come into a situation proclaiming that these are the things that we're for.
Right.
We just get into community with one another, be encouraged, and then discover later on down the road that, oh, in fact, there is this person that I follow. Yeah. And it's identifiable in my actions. So I felt like this process encouraged that within the studio, and the musicians that worked on it and the people that were just present, that to just keep living a life that's modeling after Christ, so that we make a difference. Yeah. So, you know, I think that was a really long, it made sense to me when I was pulling all that stuff together.
Man, it makes sense to me too. That's great. That's beautiful. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, man. Well, thanks again, man, for...
You're welcome. Yeah, and I'd just like to say thank you to Old Bear. This is my first real studio project, and I had a blast doing it. Good. It was such a privilege and an honor to be here and to meet and work with all these crazy talented musicians. I had a ton of fun, and it was great.
Awesome.
Thank you for listening to Baritone Podcast. The new Roemer EP called Straight Bars and Guns is out now on Old Bear Records. You can find Roemer on Apple Music, Spotify, and social media by searching Roemer, spelled Roemer. If you like what you are hearing on the show, go ahead and leave us a rating and review, and keep an eye out for more episodes dropping soon. This show is produced by Anthony Hoisington and myself, Lucas Iverson. Thanks to Sarah Bridgman for creating the show's artwork. And last but not least, thank you to Ben for sitting down and chatting with us. I hope you all are well and safe. Again, thank you for listening. Peace.
To keep your safeguards and fight for straight bars and guns. Oh, love, oh, my love, we fell asleep.